For the latest film interviews, reviews, and everything making news in pop culture, subscribe to Film Companion now.
In our new series, In Defense Of, we make a case for movies that we feel were misunderstood and that we connected with deeply. In the first episode, the master himself, Bharadwaj Rangan, defended one of his favourite films, Zero. In this episode, I'm going to discuss one of my favourite movies, Jagga Jasoos. When I first watched Jagga Jasoos in theatres back in 2017, I distinctly remember walking out feeling like I just experienced something magical and unique. A masterpiece, and that's not a term I use lightly. An absolute explosion of pure, unbridled imagination, innovation and whimsical warmth. Things we don't often see in Hindi cinema. The Anurag Basu film starring Ranbir Kapoor looked, felt and sounded like a fairy tale or comic book come to life in the hands of cinematographer Ravi Varman. Uplifting, escapist, feel-good fantasy at its best. With Jagga, Anurag Basu gave us another homegrown super sleuth detective with the wonderfully kooky, lovable oddball, Jagga, along with a series of fantastical adventures to match. Jagga is part Tintin, part Indiana Jones, part young Sherlock, and all heart, brought to life by Ranbir Kapoor in a magical performance only he could give. Jagga Jasoos is also one of those rare Hindi films which makes you think, I just want to live inside this filmmaker's imagination and be engulfed by Anurag Basu's world, which is so bursting with wonder, warmth, and happy. A touching father-son love story wrapped up in a big globe-trotting detective adventure movie, the film follows Jagga's various adventures and cases while he attempts to track down his missing adopted father, Badal Bagchi, who he calls Tutti Frutti. Tutti Frutti is played by the brilliant Shashwato Chatterjee, who Hindi audiences may remember as Kahani's iconic Bob Biswas. Except there he was hauntingly terrifying, and here, as Tutti Frutti, he's just immensely huggable. After losing his parents at a young age, Jagga developed a debilitating stutter. That is until he meets Tutti Frutti, who teaches him how to communicate through song. So of course the form of the film is different, with much of it taking place through song. There's more than 20 of them. So much so that you can't quite tell where the lyrics end and the rhythmic rhyming dialogues begin. With Anurag Basu, Amitabh Bhattacharya, Samrat Chakrabarti and Debatma Mandal all credited with the rhyming dialogue. But it's not enough to call Jagga strictly a musical with a set narrative structure which only unfolds through song like in Hollywood musicals. There's also plenty of spoken dialogue and action and musical narration and beatboxing and rapping and beyond. There's no fixed pattern, so even within its unique storytelling style, it keeps doing something new. And it never feels gimmicky because it's also rooted in so much heart and humanity. To me, Jagga was so inventive that I found it tough to be impressed by raved about movies like Baby Driver, which similarly staged action sequences to musical beats, because to me a film like Jagga did just that to a whole other level. But between all its indulgences and uniqueness, the verdict was that Jagga was rejected by audiences. Many people just couldn't connect with it, perhaps because of just how different and experimental it was. It's also a film which admittedly bites off far more than it can chew because of just how much it tries to pack in. At over 2.5 hours, it's a whole lot of movie. If its unique style wasn't enough, even its giant head-scratchy story refuses to settle for simplicity, with a dense plot which tries to introduce a franchise-worthy detective character along with a father-son story and a love story with a giant global conspiracy and a whole lot more. Not to mention its non-linear time-jumping plot which tells Tutti Frutti's story in fragments through the film. It's a film that refuses to be put in a box, which at times may come at the cost of tighter storytelling, but it's almost not surprising. It refuses to limit itself, which is also the very thing that makes it so delightful. On the flip side, the film unfolds in 3 chapters, following each of the 3 cases that Jagga solves, with each adventure bigger and more ambitious than the last. So you can literally watch it as 3 distinct episodes instead, which I think makes a big difference. So while all us fans and true believers who recognize the genius of this movie will forever be disappointed that it never became the franchise it could have been, we should be grateful because we essentially got an entire trilogy in one. It's also interesting that everything about it screams a movie for kids, something we rarely see in modern Hindi cinema. But despite that, it deals with some pretty mature themes. Like in Jagga's first case, he solves the murder of one of his teachers. Similarly, like that, the plot is filled with murders and assassinations and radicalization, terrorism, arms dealing, and a whole lot more. Almost as if more than just being for kids, it's also made for us, to celebrate our inner child and remind us to see the world with wonder once again. And if all that wasn't enough, the film is also delightfully meta. It's constantly talking to us and breaking the fourth wall. Whether it's the opening song Picture Shuru, which tells us to put our phones on silent, or that the entire film is narrated by Katrina Kaif's character Shruti Sengupta telling Jagga's story to a room full of children, and by extension, us. She knows we're in for a distinctive experience, so she tries to put us at ease at the very start, telling us to relax because it's all very informal and interactive, she says. After the second chapter ends, she even announces the interval, saying we should probably break for 15 minutes. Or my personal favourite, a moment post the interval where she's setting up the third and final adventure and she breaks into a whole bunch of exposition before she literally asks us if we're bored and then starts the show. It's also one of the few films at the time where I thought Katrina Kaif was actually well cast and not out of place as the lovably clumsy and goofy reporter Shruti Sengupta. Also, everything about the film suggests that it'll focus entirely on Ranbir's character, but after she's introduced in the second chapter, they really are equals in the story, which I thought was heartening. And of course, we have to talk about Pritam's fantastic music, the very backbone of this unforgettable experience. An album he reportedly took 3 years to put together. There are of course your big massive set piece songs like Ullu Ka Patta and Galti Se Mistake. Apart from being wonderful tunes, they're two songs that really made me see the power of what truly creative choreography can do for storytelling. Or the simple wonderful philosophy of Khana Kake, easily one of my favorite musical experiences from the film. But to me, the magic of the movie and the music lie in some of the smaller songs and scenes, which you won't find in the official album, but many of which you can find on Pritam's official YouTube channel. In one of the earliest scenes singing Chocolatey Chunnu, Tutti Frutti teaches a young Jagga to smile and believe in himself and connect and communicate in ways he never thought he could. Two kindred spirits finding each other and completing one another. Similarly, in a heart-melting sequence shortly after to the tune of Aflatun, where in one of his first cases as a young boy in boarding school, Jagga decides to track down a widower who'd carved his love for his late wife on Jagga's school bench where they were students. Or in one of the most delightfully odd meet-cutes you'll come across, Jagga has broken into Shruti's flat to investigate, and to introduce himself to her, he beatboxes and raps to the sounds of the fan and the clock and the TV. It's finding the magic and the music in the mundane.
बगीचे में कुछ फूल देर से खिलते हैं मेरे वर्ड्स भी सो के निकलते हैं
इसलिए गा के बोलता हूं ताकि smooth ho jaye.
Not to mention the quietly political and thought-provoking Humko Usse Kya or the insane fun of the Tukka Laga sequence. There's also Tutti Frutti's quirky quick-fire life lessons which he sends Jagga every year on his birthday, or that final inspired two-headed cameo which you just can't forget. After a recent rewatch of the film, I was admittedly more aware of its issues, like the dense plot or the rushed action scenes which needed more room to breathe, or the poor CGI, or even the fact that the length of Ranbir's hair and his physique constantly fluctuate through the film because it was famously shot over 3 years. But despite all of that, revisiting Jagga remains such a joyous experience. There's just so much humor and warmth in every nook and colourful corner of this movie. There's something distinctly special about the idea of feeling something for a film that not everyone does, as if you know the secret to it. I can only hope that people have and will continue to recognize its clutter-breaking genius and feel everything it has to offer. Early on in the film, through the scene where Tutti Frutti explains to Jagga how to communicate through song, Anurag Basu tells us how best to experience the movie. Tutti Frutti tells him that our brains have two sides. He says the left is logical and systematic, but he says that our brains can be rewired to think with the right, which is crazy and creative. In a world burdened by heavy, I think now more than ever, we could all use a little crazy creativity and wonder, don't you think?